Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to You Don't Have to Be Evil to Work Here, but It Helps. J.W. Wells & Co. Book 4, and today we're going to do Chapter 3. If you're enjoying me reading books to you, please subscribe to the channel, click a like button, click a notifications bell. It always helps the channel and lets us know it's all worth it. So, let's get back into it. Chapter 3. Ms. Schwartz Albrecht, the stranger said, with a patronising grin. Come in. Take a seat. Thanks for your time. Connie folded herself neatly into the small, straight chair on the other side of the desk and put down the buff-coloured file she'd brought in with her. Your time, actually, she said cheerfully. Anyhow, what can I do for you? The stranger's grin didn't increase or diminish, but its curvature shifted slightly. Good, Connie thought. I've annoyed him. She was a great believer in Potter's Law. The first muscle stiffened is the first point won. First, he said in that salad-dressing voice of his, I'd like to make it absolutely clear that there's nothing at all sinister about this. We're not looking to make any compulsory redundancies or anything like that. He lifted his head, and the morning light glanced off the steel rims of his glasses. At this stage, this is purely a routine exercise to help us to get to know you, and vice versa. Are you okay with that? Ah, Connie thought. Threats I can handle. Absolutely, she said. What a very good idea. Fire away. Now then, the stranger looked at her, blinked like a lizard. You've been with the firm for, let's see, glanced down at dossier open on desk. Connie could, of course, read upside-down words almost as easily as right-way-up ones, a skill she'd learned long ago when she first began attending meetings with colleagues, clients, and other enemies. Gracious, the stranger said. 32 years. 34, Connie replied. Look, it says on your bit of paper, 1971. 2005, take away 1971 is 34. She smiled pleasantly. 34 years. The stranger moved his sleeve to cover the dossier. Quite a long time, then. Connie shrugged. Actually, I'm a relative newcomer, compared with John or Dennis or Kaz. Dropping the first names of the ex-partners was a tactic that she'd been planning to save till later, but since the hostility level was escalating rather more sharply than she'd anticipated, she thought that she might as well deploy it straight away. It only takes one trick, as her whist-playing aunt used to say. And Benny Shumway's been here, 47 years, and Peter... Quite. The stranger frowned. I see that you spent most of your time at the San Francisco office. 17 years, Connie replied promptly. And I was sorely pissed off when young Dennis ordered me home. Trust me. Still, I can't blame him, what with all the hell breaking loose. Ah, the stranger looked at her again. You liked it out there. Well, I was more or less running the office, wasn't I? Connie said. Sure, Kurt Lundqvist was normally in charge most of the time, being a partner and all, but of course he wasn't doing any work, or anything else much. You liked being your own boss. I wouldn't put it quite like that, Connie replied. More a case of being able to get on with my work without people interfering. Much more efficient. The stranger nodded. His dossier obviously told him how successful and profitable the San Francisco office had been during her tenure there, because he changed the subject. So, has it been hard, adjusting to being back here again? No, she shrugged. I've known all of this crowd for yonks, apart from young Cassie, of course, and the work's exactly the same, over there or back here, but the coffee and donuts were better. Meanwhile, she was guessing at his age. Difficult to tell with someone so reptilian, but almost certainly the unfashionable side of 40. Not that it mattered. Bored. She liked to ground her assessment of people in basic data, And, as she got older herself, she found age increasingly significant. "Fine," the reptile said. "Now, I'd like to talk a bit about how you feel about your place in the team." "Which team?" He frowned. "Well, JWW, of course. I don't—" "Sorry," Connie said brightly. "Thought you were talking about the pub quiz. We have a showdown with Mortimers twice a year. Deadly serious stuff, as you'd expect. We lost last year, so obviously next time it'll be to the death." Sorry I interrupted you. So he didn't know who Mortimers were. She could tell from his expression. Interesting. "We like to think of JWW as a team," the reptile said, broadening his smile until Connie was sure that his teeth were about to fall out. "All of us, pulling together, working for common goals on a level playing field. We believe—" "Sports imagery," Connie interrupted. "I get you, jolly good. Go on." He subsided for a moment or so. Just a little. "Ms. Schwartz-Albrecht," he said, "where do you see yourself in, say, 5 years' time?" "Oh, that's an easy one," Connie said cheerfully. "Let's see. 11:15, so at this precise moment 5 years from now, I'll be wheeling my little wire trolley around Tesco's, filling it up with cat food. I haven't got a cat," she added, "but I've always promised myself I'll get one when I retire. Mysterious old hags living alone in remote country cottages always have cats. It's traditional." The reptile blinked. So you're planning to retire at 60, Connie said promptly. "Till then, I guess I'm just clinging on, limpid fashion, for my pension." She smiled. "And there you have it." "I see." The stranger breathed out slowly through his nose. "Well, I appreciate your frankness. Of course, we like to see a fresh, achievement-oriented attitude in our team players, which—" "Well, of course you do," Connie chirruped. "And if you care to look at your bit of paper there, top left-hand corner, more or less where your watch is, you'll see exactly how much I achieved for the firm in the last fiscal year. 14% up on the previous year. And that was when Dennis was doing most of it himself. I like to keep busy," she added. "It helps pass the time." "Impressive," the stranger said sourly. "Nevertheless, one thing we do insist on in our team is commitment. 110%. "Yeah, absolutely," Connie interrupted. "I've always said there's nothing so boring as sitting behind a desk picking your nose all day. Trouble with me is I work so fast, wonderful powers of concentration. It's a knack I was born with, I guess. I get through it all so quickly that it's hard to make it stretch out to 5:30 sometimes. We're all a bit like that here, really." "Moving on," the stranger said. "What would you say is your greatest weakness?" Connie thought for a moment. "Kryptonite," she said. "Other than that, I can handle most things." She paused. "That's a green kryptonite," she went on. "The red stuff used to bother me a bit, but these days I can just sort of shrug it off mostly." Long silence. "Thank you," the reptile said. "This has been extremely useful, and I hope—" "Oh, is that it?" Connie pulled a sad face. "Pity. It's ever so much more fun than what you actually pay me for. Can we have another go soon, please? Oh, hang on," she added. "You're supposed to ask me if there's anything I want to ask you. It'd say so. Look on your bit of—" "Another time, perhaps," the reptile said. "I've got an appointment at past, but it's only 25. Thank you so much for your time." Connie stood up. "Not a bit of it. Ah, well, back to the coal face. Nice meeting you, Mr. Mr. didn't say anything. Not at least until her hand was on the door handle. And then he called out, "Oh, I nearly forgot." "Yes?" "Here," he said. He was holding out a little plastic bag, sealed with sticky tape. "For you." "Oh!" Connie hesitated, then went back and took it from him. About the size and feel of a large apple turnover. "What's this for?" "Appropriate occasions," the reptile answered, and in his small round eyes there was a tiny flicker of satisfaction snatched from the jaws of frustration. "Goodbye." Back in her office, Connie ripped the bag open and retrieved from it a baseball cap. One size fits all. It was fluorescent green, and on the front was a bright orange logo made up of the letters JWW, hideously twisted together, as though they'd been melted in a fire. Under the logo was printed, also in orange, the A Team. Connie stared at it for a full 5 seconds before shoving it in the bottom drawer of her desk, which she then locked. She thought. That's right. Like the old saying goes, never underestimate a bastard. Well, Cassie demanded, how did it go? Connie handed her a mug of tea and sat down. Actually, she said, it was fun. Fun. Connie nodded. Thinking about it, I could have been just a teeny bit stroppier if I'd really tried, but I'd have had to set fire to his tie or squirt shaving foam up his nose. Something like that. You were stroppy. Very stroppy. Connie ladled 2 spoonfuls of sugar into her coffee and stirred it with a pencil. It was basically, if you want to fire me, here's 2 dozen perfectly good excuses, and if you don't, piss off playing silly games and let me get on with some work. I remain unfired. You've got to be firm with these people, or else they make your life a misery. I see, Cassie said neutrally. On the other hand, Connie conceded, he did give me a baseball cap. Cassie blinked. Oh, what? Here, see for yourself. Connie removed it from the drawer, using thumb and forefinger tip only, and laid it on the desktop, like a cat delivering a nicely mature dead mouse. In particular, I'd like to draw your attention to the colour. Cassie frowned. It's revolting. Connie nodded. There are some pretty sick minds in this world. It's also about 20 years behind the times, isn't it? I thought all this crap went out with paintball weekends and motivational Tai Chi on the roof every morning. I believe it goes sort of in cycles, Cassie said absently. It was taking her longer than she had anticipated to get over the fluorescent greenness of the thing. Well, Connie improvised a pair of forceps out of 2 biros and put the cap away where it wouldn't do any more harm. So, on balance, she went on, I have to put it down as a draw. Not that I'm bothered, really. It's like what they say about being a successful knife fighter. Really? Cassie looked at her. What do they say about being a successful knife fighter? Connie smiled. You can only do it if you don't really care if you lose. Like me, if they fire me, so what? I miss out on a bit of pension, but that's okay. I hardly ever spent anything on all the years I was in America. Company apartment, obscene bonuses. So if they chuck me out tomorrow, all it means is I get to be a little old lady in a country cottage a few years ahead of schedule. Compared to third world debt or the ozone layer, it's no big deal. You, on the other hand... Cassie shook her head. I've only been here 5 minutes compared with the rest of you. True. No, I think the worst thing would be the feeling that somehow they'd won. You know, coming here and beaten us at something. Connie shrugged. The hell with it. Got anything interesting on today? Hardly, Cassie replied. But as she said it, she looked away. The movement caught Connie's attention like a bramble snugging tights. I've got a presentation to work up for the manganese people, and I suppose I'd better do a bit more on the Hollinghead and Farron thing. She paused, then went on. Connie, did you ever do one of those? Connie's brow furrowed a little. Sale and purchase? Yes, actually, years ago, before I joined JWW even. Not since, though. Not exactly my favourite line of work, to be honest with you. Oh, Cassie said. Well, I can relate to that. Acting for both sides. Yes. But there you go, Connie said briskly. It's legal and it's profitable, so what the hell? No pun intended, she added quickly. And if you overlook the sort of creepy and yuck side of it, then really it's just pretty basic contract drafting. Not exactly rocket science. She twitched her nose. Actually, I did some rocket science once. Didn't like it much, though. Lots of maths and Americans. And very short lunch times. Right, Cassie said, miles away. She knew that look. She also knew to 9 decimal places, when not to interfere. I'd better be getting on, Cassie continued, swallowing a gulp of her lukewarm tea. She stood up. I take it you didn't manage to find out anything? I mean, about them. One thing, Connie said quietly. He didn't seem to know who Mortimers are. That reached her. You're kidding, which implies, Connie said, that whoever they are, they aren't in the biz. In which case, what the hell are they doing buying up JWW? I don't know what to make of that, Cassie replied. You know what? Connie grinned. Neither the hell do I. In her office, Cassie sat down, drew the green folder across the desk towards her, and opened it. She took out a stapled-together wad of A4, about 5/8 of an inch thick. This agreement. But her eyes glanced off the walls like gravel chipping off tank armour. What in God's name had possessed her to fawn him like that? This agreement made the day of 2005 between 1. Hollinghead of 17 Mayview Drive, Mortlake, Surrey, hereinafter, the vendor, and... Cassie frowned, rummaged in the file for a page of handwritten notes, and filled in the client's missing first names, which reminded her. What on earth could possibly have induced her to do such a stupid ditzy hereinafter the vendor, and 2, the Prince Governors, Directors, Supreme Council, and Diabolical Parliament of the Powers of Darkness, a statutory corporation hereinafter, the purchasers. Witnesses are as follows. 1. Although she had to admit it wasn't the first time she'd done something like that, and that was a disturbing thing about it. The last time she'd done it, she'd been 17, and madly in love with... She shuddered slightly. Not a pleasant memory, if you valued your self-esteem. 1. By letter of agreement dated the 19th of March 2005, the vendor agreed to sell his soul, hereinafter the soul, to the purchasers in consideration of the sum of money, services, and other matters detailed in the first schedule hereto, hereinafter the purchase price. She frowned and went back a line. In pencil she inserted the word facilities between services and other matters. There was another thing. All right, she'd done a strange, uncharacteristic and bloody stupid thing. The question remained, why? Deliberately, as she corrected the typo in the 5th clause of the contract, if the stupid girl didn't know how to spell brimstone, why didn't she use the spell check? She called up onto her mind screen an image of Colin Hollinghead. Yes, Cassie thought. Well, nothing special. Absolutely nothing special. She played back as much as she could remember of what he'd said. Nothing special there either. It was beyond question that she'd fallen for some real waste products in her time, but in each unhappy instance there'd been something that had baited the hook. Nice eyes, a Brando-esque swagger, tight buns, a passable imitation of Robin Cook. Colin Hollinghead. Nothing. Nondescript, charmless, thick as a fantasy trilogy, pointy nose, devoid of any vestige of appeal whatsoever. Hand on non-fluttering heart, she wasn't in love with him one teeny tiny bit. So why the phone call? It was as though someone else had hijacked her hand and ear and made her do it. Weird. 7. The vendor covenants with the purchasers that he will not, A. in the ordinary course of business, commit any mortal sin, as defined by the Mortal Sins Classification and Consolidation Regulations 1975, that would render him liable to eternal damnation irrespective of the terms of this agreement. B. Adhere to any faith, sect, religion, or philosophy whose precepts do not acknowledge the existence of the purchasers. C. Notwithstanding the provisions of the Unfair Contract Terms Act 1968, seek by any act of repentance, absolution, contrition, or charitable good works to frustrate the terms of this contract by incurring divine forgiveness. And yet another bizarre thing. When they'd been talking, after Cassie had given him the folder to take away, and he'd happened to mention that he'd got pins and needles in his foot, déjà vu, or whatever it was called, it was as though she'd heard him say exactly those words before. She could practically hear his voice in her head, except that it wasn't his voice, and when she tried to listen, it faded away. That was definitely part of it, a feeling that she knew him from somewhere, except that it wasn't him really, just someone identical to him in every respect. 8. In the event that the day of judgment shall occur during the term of this contract, or such other event as may cause the heavens to be opened and the dead to be raised incorruptible, the vendor and the purchasers agree and declare that all issues hereunder arising shall be referred to arbitration in accordance with the provisions of Schedule 16 hereof. The arbitrator's decision to have effect as though it was an express term of this agreement. Cassie read Clause 8 over again. But her eyes kept slipping off the words like court shoes on a polished floor. That was supposed to be another symptom, wasn't it? Not being able to concentrate at work. Stuff it, she thought. I can't go on like this. I can't even proofread a basic standard form contract without my attention wandering. She stood up, pushed her hair back over her ears, sat down again. Concentrate, damn it. She couldn't. Bugger, she said aloud, and went to see Connie. But Connie wasn't in her office. So Cassie traipsed up 3 flights of stairs, across 2 landings, and along a very long corridor to see if Benny Shumway was back from the bank yet. She was just in time to see the little plywood door in the far wall of his office opening, and Benny clambering through, slamming the door shut and shooting back the 7 sturdy bolts. He looked more than usually hassled, and she'd waited until he'd sat down, taken several deep breaths, and wiped the blood off his hands with a swathe of paper towel before she said anything. "Did they give you a hard time?" Cassie asked. Benny shook his head. "No worse than usual," he replied, then closed his eyes for a moment. "It's since we started using the goats instead of doves. Sometimes I wish we hadn't switched over from Barclays. Anyhow," he went on, lighting up the trademark Shumway smile. How many times had he been married? He told her. Several times, but she couldn't remember offhand. "How's life in mergers and acquisitions?" She shrugged. "Boring," she replied. "I don't know. I just can't seem to keep my mind on my work right now." The smile morphed into the equally characteristic Shumway grin. She scowled. "Don't start," she said. "I wasn't starting. Promise. And besides, a man can dream." "No, you can't." "All right." Benny held up his hands. "So it isn't that then. What is it? You aren't fretting over these stupid assessments, are you?" "Maybe," she lied. "Had yours yet?" He shook his head. "But Connie dropped in just before I left for the bank." He raised his eyebrows and sighed. "Mind you, she always was the fearless kind. Fearless as 2 short planks, as my old boss at Robertson's used to say. She always gets away with it, too." Cassie smiled. "I think it helps that she's too good at a job to sack." "There's that," Benny conceded. "But there's more to it, I think. Really, she's wasted in mineral rights. Should have gone in for pest control years ago." The grin broke out again. "She'd have looked pretty cute in chainmail." "I'll tell her you said that." "Don't even think about it," Benny replied quickly. "I've nothing but the deepest respect for Connie, bordering on abject terror." "I'll have to tell her you said that," Cassie replied with a smile. "So come on, what have you found out about them? You're always saying how nothing happens in this business without you knowing about it first." "I know," Benny said ruefully. "For once, however, colour me clueless, not for want of asking around. But the weird thing is, nobody seems to know anything, which leads me to the conclusion—" "That they aren't in the business at all," Cassie interrupted. "Like Connie was saying, the creep not having heard of Mortimer's, and so forth." Benny nodded. "And that just doesn't make sense. For one thing, it's not allowed. Outsiders can't go around buying into the business. There's rules about that sort of thing, understandably. I think there's even a British standard or something." Cassie picked up a paperclip and started to unbend it. "One of these days," she said, "you're going to have to tell me exactly what did happen when all the old partners left and—" "They didn't leave," Benny said, with a deep chuckle. "Let's see. Theo Vansby was killed. Ditto Ricky Wormtoter. Last we heard of Judy di Castelbianco, she was permanently marooned on the Isle of Avallon, and Humph Wells got turned into a photocopier." Cassie couldn't help shuddering a little at that. "Not the big old one in the computer room," she said. "The one that always chews up spreadsheets." Benny laughed. "Nah, Humph broke down about 3 months before you joined, and he was an old muddle. Couldn't get the parts. He's up in the roof space somewhere, along with the broken chairs and the old VAT receipts." "Ugh!" "Don't worry. He asked for it. Long story. I'll tell you about it sometime. No, it's a rough old game we're in, and from time to time bad stuff happens. You know that." "Of course, but losing so many partners one after another."
You're starting to sound like Lady Bracknell.
I've heard people talking about some bloke called Carpenter, Cassie said. Apparently it was all his fault.
Up to a point, Benny replied. Paul Carpenter and Sophie Pettingill, last heard of happily married and fabulously rich somewhere in New Zealand. He paused. You didn't come here because you're fascinated by industrial history. What's the matter?
And wasn't there another partner, Kurt something, who came to a bad end?
Don't change the subject.
All right, she frowned. God knows why I'm telling you, of all people. You'll just do your lewd grin and make unregenerate sexist remarks. Benny rubbed his hands together.
You bet. Go on in.
So Cassie told him about Colin Hollinghead and the phone call, and even pins and needles. To her complete surprise, however, Benny didn't leer, grin, snigger, or say things. He hardly moved at all, except that while she was explaining about the déjà vu thing, he frowned deeply and put his hand in front of his mouth.
Is that it?
He said. Yes, I think so. You're pretty quiet. He nodded.
Bit weird if you ask me.
Coming from you? She glanced across at the plywood door with its 7 massive bolts. Now I'm really starting to worry.
Don't, he said quickly. Honestly, I don't think it's something horrible, anything like that. Actually, it sort of reminds me of something, but buggered if I can remember what.
You're a great help.
Proverbially,
Benny said graciously.
But not on this occasion. Not yet, anyhow. But I promise I'll give it some thought.
Suddenly his face lit up in a huge, no-holds-barred smile that took Cassie completely by surprise.
We'll figure it out. Don't you worry. Meanwhile, he went on,
the smile vanished as suddenly as it had appeared.
I'd better get on with some work. Fortunately, I can think and do mental long division at the same time.
Cassie headed back to her office. As she was passing the closed file store, she very nearly collided with the pale-faced girl whose name nobody seemed able to remember. She apologised. The pale-faced girl looked at her intensely for a moment, as if reading small print reflected in Cassie's eyes. "That's all right," said the pale girl. "It wasn't your fault, though you weren't looking where you were going. But I came round the corner too fast, and I should have kept to my side of the corridor. I could easily have trodden on your foot if you hadn't swerved in at the last moment." "Ah," Cassie said. "So really, it's me what owes you an apology." "Oh, well," Cassie said, "that's all right." "Thank you," the pale-faced girl said gravely. "In return, please accept this gift as a token of my appreciation for your forbearance." She held out her hand. The fingers were clamped tight around something, and the knuckles were white. "Gift," Cassie repeated. "Present," the thin-faced girl explained. "Go on, please take it. It's all right. It won't bite or anything." Cassie looked at the outstretched hand and made no move. "That's very kind of you," she said cautiously. "What is it?" "Take it, and you can see for yourself." "Would you mind awfully telling me what it is first?" The thin-faced girl's eyebrows cuddled together, then parted. "Oh, it's nothing really, just a small glass bead." "Ah." "It does, however," the thin-faced girl went on, "have some interesting properties. If you hold it up to the light and look into it, you can see the face of your own true love." "Gosh," Cassie said, and she was about to add that it was a really, really nice thought, but even so, if it was all the same to her, she'd pass on it just for now, when the thin-faced girl grabbed her by the wrist and pressed something small, round and hard into the palm of her hand. "Well, bye for now," she said, "and if you want to drop by my office later on and tell me what you saw in there, do please feel free. There's nothing I enjoy more than some really juicy girl-to-girl gossip." The thin-faced girl opened the door of the closed file store and went inside. Cassie wasn't sure, but she had an idea that she heard the click of a lock or the crunch of a bolt. You don't have to be weird to work here, she thought, but on her desk, when she got back to it, was a small stack of those little red and white while-you-were-out notes. All of them urged her to phone Mr. Hollinghead at Hollinghead and Farren ASAP. She sat down, realising she was still holding in her hand the small round thing that the loony girl had given her. She opened her hand and something dropped onto her desk, bouncing and rolling a bit before finally coming to rest beside her stapler. After all that, it turned out to be nothing more exciting than a perfectly ordinary kid's marble. Then she picked up her phone and called the front desk. "Which Mr. Hollinghead?" she asked. "You what?" replied Rosie on reception. "There's more than one of them," Cassie explained. "An old one and a young one." Pause. "You left a note on my desk saying I've got to call back a Mr. Hollinghead of Hot." "Yes, all right. I need to make a 3-hour buddy mini-series out of it." "Sorry. Look, did he say which one he was?" "No." "All right," Cassie said, driving away the small yapping Yorkshire Terrier of frustration from around her mind's ankles. "Did he sound old or young?" "Search me. All you humans sound the same." "Look," Cassie snapped, but Rosie on reception went on. "He sounded really pissed off and swore a lot. If that's any help." "Ah," Cassie said, "that'll be Mr. Hollingshead Sr. There you go, then." Cassie put the phone down and picked up the file, which was on her desk where she'd left it. Father Hollingshead, calling to ask about some detail of the draft contract. For some reason she felt mortally disappointed. But why? She found the number on the information docket stapled to the back cover of the file and dialed it.
"At last," said Mr. Hollingshead. "I called 5 times.
6, actually," Cassie replied amiably. "How can I help?"
"It says clause 3. What the bloody hell is it supposed to mean?"
So she explained clause 3. This process required no conscious thought whatsoever. She had explained that clause, or clauses just like it, 100 times to 100 different clients. She wasn't even listening to herself. Instead, she was thinking, if Benny Shamway thinks it's weird, it must be really out of this world bizarre, and then he tells me not to worry about it. Yes, right, no problem. I'll dismiss it from my mind this instant. Like hell I will. And that, she caught herself saying, is all there is to it, really.
"I see," grumbled Mr. Hollingshead. "Then why in buggery can't you just say that instead of wrapping it all up in that legalese bullshit?"
"Why, indeed," Cassie replied. "Well, actually, it's because a contract like this is a highly technical document, and all the words in it have very specialised meanings, which aren't necessarily the same as in everyday speech, so—"
"And another thing, Schedule 5, Paragraph 2, 5 lines up from the bottom."
"What?" "Oh, yes, the jurisdiction clause. What about it?"
"I don't understand a bloody word of it. What's all this about the Acapulco Convention for a start?"
So Cassie explained about conflicts of jurisdiction and how some kinds of dispute that might arise from the contract could be dealt with by an ordinary county court in Britain, while other kinds would have to be dealt with by the Supreme Tribunal of Absolute Evil in Pandemonium. "It's a bit of a pain," she conceded, "but I'm afraid there's nothing we can do about that. It's a standard clause. Take it or leave it. Besides," she went on, "that sort of dispute is pretty unlikely to crop up. It's only really relevant is—"
"Fine," grunted Mr. Hollingshead. "So that's all this in Schedule 10, Section 6B. You never mentioned any of this shit at the meeting."
10 more minutes of that sort of thing, which was good in a sense, because it meant that Cassie could score another 2 6-minute units on her timesheet, which in turn meant a proportionate increase in Mr. Hollingshead's bill, about which he would unquestionably complain bitterly. Fine. Then a little crackle of inspiration jumped her mental points. "Look," she said, "obviously there's quite a lot in the draft contract that we need to talk about, so wouldn't it make more sense to go over it together? Face to face rather than on the phone. If you could maybe drop by the office?" Derisory snort.
"No chance, far too busy."
"That's all right," Cassie said smoothly. "I'll come and see you. Would 10:15 tomorrow morning suit you?" Pause. Silence of a man who should have seen it coming.
"Aye, all right. We can get it all sorted out and out of the way. Then maybe we can get on and see some action. 10:15 sharp."
"As a needle," Cassie said cheerfully. "Goodbye." She put the phone down and leant back in her chair. So, she thought, so tomorrow I'm going to where he lives, to see his old dad. Maybe he'll be sitting in the meeting too. In which case, what though? Still no trace of an answer to that question. Sigh. She dumped the corrected draft of the contract into her out tray with a yellow sticky attached that read, "Revised draft by 9:15 a.m. tomorrow, please." The sooner the contract was signed and out the way, the sooner she could close the file, bang in a whopping great bill, and move on to something else. Wouldn't that be nice? Something caught her eye. That stupid marble, the present from the thin girl. On a whim, Cassie picked it up and held it to the light, but all she could see was the little red swirly bit in the middle. That evening, on her return to her small, expensive flat in Chessington, she found 6 messages on her answering machine. Messages 1 to 5 inclusive were from her mother. Message 6, on the other hand, was a bit odd. She couldn't make out what it was, either birdsong or someone whistling very badly, or the warble of an unusually melodious fax machine. She played it through 3 times out of sheer naked curiosity. Then she deleted it and went to bed. Thank you for listening right through to Chapter 3 of You Don't Have to Be Evil to Work Here, but It Helps, which is Book 4 in the JWW Wells series by Tom Holt, the amazing superstar Tom Holt. Anyway, if you do like me reading these books, please give me a like, hit the subscribe button, share it, hit the notifications bell, do backflips, make a cake, maybe make a cup of tea. And this is my little message to say I hope I see you again, or read to you again in Chapter 4, which will be out day after next. So have a beautiful day, and thanks for listening.